Hi there, welcome to my follow-up thoughts, I guess general review of the Lionsteel SR2a. So the SR2a is an integral, which means the handle is one piece, frame lock, which means a piece of the frame is sprung to be the opening and closing lock of the knife, made of aluminium, and Sleipner tool steel. It has a stainless steel pocket clip. It has this over travel stop, which I'll talk about later on. It is opened by a thumb stud. It sits on Teflon washers, and it has pretty standard use hardware, so that's Torx, but a bit of a jazzy design. Let's get into the facts and what I like and what I don't like about this knife. So the Lionsteel SR2a, the name comes from a derivative of the SR1, which was an original knife that they started making a few years ago now. The SR1 was a larger version of this, had a 3.5 inch or so blade, usually a titanium handle was the first run, and then it also went to the SR1a, A for aluminium. This is the EDC variant, so it's made to be much more of a carryable knife, not that the original one wasn't. The blade length is 3.07 inches, so it's 78 millimeters to the blade. The thickness is 4 millimeters, so that's a little bit on the thicker side. The steel is Udenholm Sleipner steel. You can get it coated and uncoated. I always prefer uncoated. The locking mechanism is a frame lock, and it has this hardened steel over travel insert, which you can wind down once the knife is open, and that stops all but stops the knife from the line from going back that way until you then rotate it and unlock it. It's got a stainless steel pocket clip. The clip is fixed to this glass breaker, which does need special hardware to remove, or you could just use a pair of pliers, but you might scratch up your glass breaker there. It's a fairly redundant glass breaker because it's not too sharp, and it's just kind of more of a, I think more of an artistic choice more than anything, just to perhaps reaffirm the hard use intent behind this knife perhaps. It weighs 3.81 ounces, which is 108 grams, so it's slightly heavier than your standard Spyderco Delica Ontario Rat 2 type 3-inch knives. So that's the facts about the knife. It's made in Italy as well, and I paid 220 Australian dollars. In America, Knife Centre has it at the moment for $160. So what do I like about the knife? Well, and I guess this could also be part of the facts section, because this is a divisive appearance for a knife. Some people are going to think this is a great looking knife, and other people are going to think it's too jazzy, ugly, not realistic looking, too eye-catching, too whatever. I actually think it's a really good looking knife, and I think before you make up your mind, I would encourage you to try and hold it in your hand first, because I thought the orange SR1 was hideous. But I saw this in red, and I thought, you know what, the red really mutes it down a little bit. The bright orange was a bit much for me. But when I look at it in red, and when I took it out of the box especially, there's lots of details that I do really like. So I like the integral. You like it from both a technical standpoint and from a just a cleanliness of design standpoint. I like the pocket clip a lot. The pocket clip is one of the best pocket clips I've used, and just in general this knife is one of the best carrying knives I've used, despite it looking slightly thicker than the average blade. So I'm very, very happy with that. I like a lot the blade shape. I like the broad blade face. They needed to do that because they've got about 1 millimeter thicker stock than most other pocket knives, or even a bit more than 1 millimeter, because 4 millimeters for a for a pocket knife. I mean, this is a Falcon-Even F1. It's not it's not super thin compared to it, is it? Like it's definitely getting there. And just for size comparison, that's the F1 next to the knife. So if you remember perhaps that zero tolerance I showed you, which was the same size as the F1 a couple of videos ago, it's a much smaller knife. Anyway, it's it needs that broad blade face, because to get a blade that thick down to a keen cutter and a keen slicer, they need to really work on that long angular grind, so really shallow angles all the way down to a convex cutting edge, which is an interesting choice as well. I like that the knife slices and cuts very well. The blade shape is really, really versatile. You can use this belly for lots of things. You can do really good belly cuts if it's sharp enough, just dipping it into sort of tape or whatnot to just open things you don't want to scratch the insides of when you've got a package, for example, that's taped on the top. You could say if this was the cardboard tape seam, you could slide along this. So that's really good for that. Reasonable enough food prep. The steel, I haven't formed an opinion on the steel just yet. It seems to be holding an edge quite well. I've done a fair bit of box work on it. It marks up like crazy. It's the polish level that I've gone on has gone from sort of slightly, there's various levels of polish in my experience, and you can go from, you know, nice and silver but doesn't show up fingerprints very well, and then you can get that extra little level, and this one shows up everything that you've touched the blade with. So yeah, a little bit of use on it as well, I guess, but it's not showing up too badly. It looks terrible when you put the light on it, but just from in the pocket it looks just fine. So I like that a lot. I really like the appearance. I'm a fan. I think it's a great looking knife. I like the sturdy feel of the knife. It's a durable feeling blade. It's got, you know, whether this is a feature that you need or not, which I'll talk about, spoilers, in the next category, it's still, regardless of that, it's a thick enough frame lock. I know it's just aluminium, but they've got to put a pretty reasonable lock insert in there, which is made of stainless steel, so it does feel like a very durable knife. The grip is good. It's not my favourite thing about the knife, but compared to what I thought it was going to be, they've got the ergonomics dialed in to fit my hand fairly well. Slight parrot's beak at the back there does undo some of the slickness that the the aluminium gets. The ribbing doesn't offer any grip. It's purely for aesthetics, in my opinion. The jimping on the back here is good for, you know, fixing it in hand when you're doing a heavier cut. However, you can still, even when you grip the knife, you can still pull it out of your hand, like a G10 blade, or for example this Volkative F1. You could put that in a vise and probably hang from this knife, whereas this one, if you were to put this in a vise and try and hang from it, a slightest bit of moisture especially, you'd be coming straight off of it. So just something to think about if you're thinking of using this for hard use. That being said, I don't think this is a hard use knife. I think the size makes it quite a good everyday use knife. So those are the things I like about the knife. Let's get into what I don't like about the knife. The first and a more minor thing I don't like about the knife is this here. This is fine, it's a fine idea, but like any sort of new ideas, I kind of feel like someone's got a bit excited about its existence and put it on a knife that perhaps doesn't need it. The problem here is they've put it on a knife with fairly slick scale material, so when you open this knife up, so you can open this knife, my finger sometimes slides down, so it's hard to do, and now I'm thinking of doing it, I probably won't. So I'll open this knife and my finger sometimes slides down, sometimes, and you know, even if it's just 1 in 10, it's still annoying, slides down, and by the time it's open, I've often pushed this closed with my index finger. So then when I go to close the knife, which I generally just use my knife for single or a couple of cuts, not for hard use, so when I go to close the knife, it distracts me and it's not as enjoyable. It's not, you have to remember, oh, I must have activated this, then you have to get your other hand, wind it back, and then close the knife. For something that is a fairly, it can really break the mood of using the knife, it's a little bit jiggly as well. Like, it's not, I know they probably don't want it to be hard to use, and I know they're probably very conscious of making it difficult to pinch because it's got very little exposed, you know, it's almost flush with the knife. But I think they could have perhaps tightened it down a bit so you couldn't knock it closed without intentionally doing it. So that's the first problem I have with this blade. Not a major one. It's not something that I do all the time, and I'm getting used to not doing it. But it's a bit like when you first get a compression lock on the Paramilitary 2. You have to sort of remember not to have your fat of your hand pinched over there when you close it, because it can give you a bit of a pinch, which is way less annoying than this when you don't think about it. But it's just one of those things you have to learn about the knife. Not a deal breaker. What may be a deal breaker to you if the looks haven't put you off, which I understand if they do. People say that's one of the ugliest knives I've ever seen. Other people say that looks amazing. Very fair enough. What may put you off is the action, and it kind of puts me off as well. For someone who, let's be honest here, we're all knife guys. Playing with our knives is about 70% of their use. Actually using them is about 30% of our use. So really, to play with this knife, you start to notice, especially in sync with this problem here, this knife is not fun to open and close. There's two reasons for this. First of all, there's Teflon washers in there, which I don't understand. They've gone to the trouble of making an integral handled knife, which is an expensive process. And I guess because there's not much give in the handle, perhaps that's just a matter of they use plastic because they can squeeze it in. But I figure if the Nirvana, which I know is a very expensive knife, if that can get a ball bearing system in it, for a lot more money, surely they could have got phosphor bronze in there for a little bit less money. I would pay an extra $10 for this knife if it flew open when I flicked that thumb stud. But unless you really use your wrist, it doesn't. It's a smooth opener. It's Teflon smooth. So Teflon gives you smooth openings if you're lucky. Sometimes it's a bit jerky. And even this, as it comes out of the detent, it is a slight bit jerky, but generally quite smooth. No grit or anything like that, of course. But just in company with the other problem with this knife, it makes for a not particularly fun knife to open. A lot of fun once it is open and you're using it and you're examining it and stuff. It's great. But the other problem is those thumb studs. That if this was a smooth pivot and you just had to flick these studs, wouldn't be much of an issue. But because you have to grind your thumb against those studs for pretty much 90% of the follow through to open it, you'll see there, they're quite pointy. There's 3 tiers of sharp edge coming in a very, 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 very small point there, which does actually get your thumb. Well, that's why my thumb looks like that, to be honest. I've been playing with this knife for days now, and I've been using the knife for days, and my thumb looks like that, and I haven't got dainty hands. I've got sort of, I'm not a super tough, cool guy, but I've got working person's hands, so they're not shredded up by just anything. So the thumb studs are really giving me a bit of grief. So if that is something that is going to bother you, be wary of it now before taking the plunge on this knife, because I've tried fiddling with the pivot and it doesn't do a great deal, and then you get a little bit of rattle. So I've settled on having a stiffer, smoother knife that I'll kind of just open when I need to open, so it might well mean that I'll carry it less. So that's the thing I don't like about the knife. And it's a fairly large thing, so I'd understand if it put you off this blade, especially for the price. For $220, phosphor bronze should be the bare minimum of your opening and your pivot systems. Really should be, just in my opinion. So overall, I think it's a nice everyday carry knife. It carries very well and uses very well once it's open. However, for someone who is going to play with their knife often, it's like a fiddle toy for all of us borderline autistic knife nerds. It really is. And so it's gonna bother your thumb a little bit. So just be warned that if that's something that is an issue for you, there's no real problems with the knife. And the knife has some of the best fit and finish, and in my opinion, the best looks I've ever had on a knife. It's a very well-made knife. It's just the design lets it down with that thumb stud and that rotoblock there. So overall, I hope I've just kept you informed, because this is sort of, if you're collecting knives, there isn't many knives that look like this, so I can see the temptation of going and grabbing one of these, especially if you're just after another little EDC to mix up in your rotation. And I would still recommend this. I would still recommend this for that purpose, but this is not your only knife. This is not the knife to get for a person with no other knives. It could well put them off of one-hand opening knives. It's a knife for someone to carry occasionally. It's a knife for a collector like me, for someone who uses lots of different ones. So there you go. The only other thing I would suggest is, if you're bothered by convex edges at all, which are initially fiercely sharp but lose that sharpness fairly quickly, however maintain a working edge for a long, long time, then you shouldn't have a problem. But just be aware that it is a convex edge, and it's quite it's a very well done convex edge, but it might be a little bit tricky to reset that on like a sharp maker or something, because the steel does seem a bit D2 hardish as well for me. So just something else to be aware of. So what do you think? Do you like this knife? I'd love to hear in the comments, especially about how you feel about the looks, because divisive is how I would expect it to be. Anyway, thanks so much for watching, and thanks for waiting around for a long-term review. Just hope that's covered a few points that you might have been curious about. I'll see you next time. Bye now.